What if the greatest betrayal in Scripture was only half the story? What if Judas did not die by rope or by fall, but by something far darker, a curse that turned him into the first vampire of Christendom? Chapter 1. The Betrayer's Curse. The Gospels tell us Judas was among the 12 chosen, walking beside Christ, eating from the same table, and entrusted with the purse of coins. Yet he is remembered for one act alone, the exchange of 30 pieces of silver. Scripture describes his end in contradictions. In Matthew, he hangs himself. In Acts, he falls headlong, bursting open upon the ground. 2 deaths, 2 endings. Why? Some scholars dismiss this as error, but others suggest it is concealment. 2 fragments of a greater, untold fate. Apocryphal texts describe Judas not as gone, but wandering. His body would not decay. His death never seemed to hold. Pale, hollow-eyed, he walked the hills of Judea, cursed by what he had done. The betrayal itself was marked not by sword or coin, but by blood. A kiss pressed to Christ's cheek. Was it merely a signal, or the sign of a darker exchange? Early mystics whispered that Judas was cursed by heaven itself, not condemned to ordinary death, but condemned to thirst, a punishment fit for the one who betrayed life itself. Ancient Syriac fragments claim the earth rejected his body, spitting him back from the grave. Shepherds told of a figure that prowled at night, pale as the moon, hiding his face. Mothers warned their children never to wander past the olive groves, for Judas still walked there, hungering. If Cain was cursed to wander for spilling his brother's blood, could Judas have been cursed the same? Not merely to walk, but to feed. Was the first vampire not born in myth, but in the very pages of the Bible? Chapter 2. Judas the Wanderer. As centuries passed, the image of Judas did not fade with the pages of Scripture. In the medieval world, his fate was spoken of in hushed tones, not as a man who died, but as a figure who lingered, cursed, restless, unredeemed. Theologians struggled with his contradictions. Why would one gospel say he hanged himself, while another claimed his body burst open on the earth? Medieval scribes noted that Judas's blood was mentioned more than once, almost as if his punishment was bound to it. Some monasteries whispered that Judas's blood did not dry, that it carried a stain passed from one century to the next. Legends spread across Europe in the Germanic tradition. Judas was said to wander the night, cloaked and pale, begging for forgiveness yet recoiling from the cross. In Eastern tales, peasants feared that Judas appeared at crossroads, his eyes black with hunger, offering travelers silver in exchange for a drop of blood. He was not remembered as a corpse, but as a presence. Mystics wrote of Judas in coded texts. Some linked him to Cain, both cursed wanderers who had shed innocent blood. Cain's curse was to walk the earth untouchable. Judas's, they said, was worse, to feed on the life he had betrayed, to be denied death yet denied peace. The earliest whispers of vampirism echoed here. A man who could not rest in soil, who was rejected by heaven, and who drew vitality from others in order to continue. Folk remedies against Judas emerged in village superstition. Children were told to sleep with iron beneath their pillows, for Judas could slip into homes and steal breath. Farmers hung garlic at their doors, not just for plague, but against the pale figure said to walk after moonrise. These defenses, centuries before vampire fiction, reveal that Judas's memory had already taken the shape of the blood drinker. The church condemned such tales as heresy, yet the silence of priests did not erase them. It only made them grow. For the peasants of medieval Europe, Judas was not gone. He was still among them, walking under a starlight, cursed to wander until the world's end. Thus, the betrayer of Christ became something more. Not just a symbol of guilt, but a figure of eternal dread. The first of the undying, the one who could never find the grave. Chapter 3. The blood of the Renaissance. By the Renaissance, Europe was no longer whispering in candle-lit monasteries. It was an age of discovery, of art, of new science, yet also of shadows. As the world reached toward enlightenment, secret societies and occult scholars reached back, pulling Judas into their hidden texts. Painters and poets revived his image. Judas was no longer shown as a simple thief or coward, but as a figure bathed in unnatural pallor, his face gaunt, his eyes dark, his betrayal almost too intimate. In some depictions, the kiss of Judas was painted not as treachery alone, but as something that drew life from Christ, as if Judas consumed rather than simply identified. Occult manuscripts spoke even bolder. The Clavicula Noctis, a text confiscated by the Inquisition in the late 1500s, described Judas as the undying traitor whose thirst is unquenched, whose body is ash yet unburnt. Within its pages was the suggestion that Judas's curse was not death, but hunger, and that his silver, those 30 coins, were tokens of power capable of binding souls to the night. Witch trials of the era also echoed his shadow. Accused women were sometimes charged with invoking Judas, not merely as a betrayer, but as a spirit of wandering, one who taught them to feed upon the living. In these confessions, forced though they were, Judas was not man but phantom, returning to pass his curse through ritual and pact. Philosophers of the Renaissance, too, wrestled with his contradictions. Some, like Pico della Mirandola, hinted that Judas's fate reflected divine punishment not yet understood, an exile that mirrored Cain's but extended into eternity. Others quietly noted that the earth rejecting his burial was not metaphor, but something literal. Judas was denied rest, for he was no longer truly mortal. In hidden cabals, alchemists whispered of Judas's blood, a red tincture said, to prolong life, but at a terrible cost. Legends claimed it was drawn from earth itself, where his body had burst open, mingled with coins blackened by sin. Drinking it, they warned, was to invite the curse of unending hunger. Thus, in the Renaissance, Judas was no longer confined to the pages of Scripture. He had slipped into art, into ritual, into whispered experiments of those who sought eternity. And though the church burned these writings where it found them, the idea remained. Judas was not dead. He had become something else, something Europe, despite all its light, could not banish. Chapter 4. The Inquisition's Silence. The Renaissance had whispered Judas into paintings, poems, and occult texts. But as the Inquisition tightened its grip on Europe, those whispers became dangerous. The Church had long defined Judas as traitor, the one damned for eternity. To allow him to be seen as anything else, undying, wandering, feeding, was heresy. And yet, the evidence suggests these very stories existed and were erased across Spain, Italy, and the German states. The Inquisition collected manuscripts that dared to reinterpret Scripture. Some of these volumes, now lost, were described in surviving inventories. One, the Liber Tenebrarum, reportedly spoke of Judas as non mortuus sed famelicus, not dead, but famished. Another text, seized in Prague, described a sect that believed Judas's rope had never snapped his neck, but transformed it into a collar, binding him to eternal hunger. Both records vanish after mention in trial documents. The books themselves are gone, burned perhaps, or hidden. Testimonies from trials also hint at Judas's shadow. A woman in Toledo, accused of witchcraft in 1572, confessed under torture that her coven drank the blood of the betrayer. Whether invention or memory, such words reveal Judas was invoked not just as betrayer, but as a figure of power. Another man, tried in Venice, claimed Judas appeared to him in a dream, offering coins that turned to ash when he held them. He was executed the following week. Yet the church did not permit public discourse. Sermons spoke of Judas only as cautionary tale. The contradictions in Scripture, the two deaths, were explained away as metaphor, but silence can be its own form of confession by forbidding the conversation. The Inquisition may have revealed the fear that such legends carried truth. Meanwhile, villagers kept telling their stories. In Sicily, families swore that Judas's ghost walked the olive groves, his breath cold, his hands clawed. In Poland, mothers told children Judas would come at night, not with rope, but with teeth. Priests dismissed such tales, yet they survived because the fear was stronger than the command to forget. The Inquisition silenced countless voices, but shadows are not so easily erased. And in these shadows, Judas's image endured, not as a man who died, but as a man denied death, not as the betrayer alone, but as something more, something the church could not explain and perhaps dared not admit. Chapter 5. The Age of Reason. The age of fear. The Enlightenment promised light. Science, medicine, and reason claimed to cast away superstition. Yet, in the very century when scholars sought to bury myths, the figure of Judas re-emerged, not from pulpits or monasteries, but from the morgue and the graveyard. Between the late 1600s and early 1700s, Europe was shaken by what historians now call the vampire hysteria. Reports arrived from Serbia, Hungary, and Poland describing corpses that refused decay. Villagers who swore the dead walked at night. Families drained of life. Officials investigated. Priests performed exorcisms. Physicians exhumed bodies and recorded what they saw. Skin still supple, nails and hair seeming to grow, blood fresh at the lips. To the learned elite, these were anomalies of decomposition. To the frightened villagers, they were proof that Judas's curse lived on, for they recognized the marks. A man who could not stay buried, a body that burst with blood, a figure pale and unholy, returning to feed. The traits assigned to nameless corpses were the very traits once whispered of Judas. Some theologians tried to make sense of it. A Jesuit scholar in 1725 wrote of the wandering spirit of the traitor replicated in these revenants. Another suggested that every vampire was a fragment of Judas's punishment, a curse multiplied, spreading across generations. To them, Judas was not myth, but origin, the first who had been cursed, and through him, the rest were born. Even government records reveal the tension. Maria Theresa of Austria, disturbed by vampire panics in her empire, sent physicians to disprove them. Yet the reports they brought back described bodies so lifelike that soldiers refused to touch them. The Empress outlawed vampire executions in 1755, but the fear endured. For the common people, Judas had never died. He had only multiplied. Thus, in the Enlightenment, the supposed age of reason, Judas's shadow was not diminished, but magnified. Scholars dissected, priests denied, rulers suppressed. But the villagers still lit fires at night, still hung garlic by their doors, still buried their dead with stones in their mouths. And in their whispered stories, Judas's curse was clear. The first vampire had not been a legend of peasants, but a truth hidden in the contradictions of Scripture, resurfacing in graves across Europe. Chapter 6. Judas in the Gothic Age. By the dawn of the 19th century, Europe had entered a new age of imagination. The Enlightenment's cold light had exposed many shadows, yet one lingered. The fascination with death, sin, and the forbidden. In the rise of Gothic literature, the figure of Judas resurfaced, not as an apostle of shame, but as the prototype of the vampire itself. The Romantics hungered for the macabre. Poets like Coleridge, Byron, and Goethe explored specters, wanderers, and unholy appetites. And though they rarely named him, Judas's presence loomed behind their creations. In Goethe's Faust, the damned scholar trades his soul for knowledge and power, echoing Judas's bargain for silver. In Coleridge's Christabel, a mysterious figure feeds upon innocence in the night, her pale beauty concealing her curse. Readers whispered, was this not Judas's curse, reborn in poetry? But it was Lord Byron's circle that first made the vampire a modern figure. His tale, The Giaour, 1813, describes a cursed man condemned to walk by night, thirsting for blood as punishment for betrayal. The poem's imagery is haunting. Pale skin, restless wandering, hunger without end. Though Byron drew upon Balkan folklore, the echoes of Judas are unmistakable. The betrayer cursed, the wanderer denied rest, the sinner whose punishment was thirst. From these seeds, the Gothic vampire bloomed. John Polidori's The Vampire, 1819, introduced the first aristocratic vampire, Lord Ruthven, a figure of charm, seduction, and cruelty. Though cast in noble garb, his curse was ancient. Some early critics noted the similarity to Judas, a betrayer, intimate with death, marked by blood, and yet unending. The Church ignored such parallels, but readers sensed the familiar. Occultists of the 19th century also revived Judas in their secret writings. The French mystic Eliphas Lévy claimed Judas embodied the wandering spirit who drinks vitality, not wine. Another group, the Rosicrucians, whispered that Judas's 30 pieces of silver had never been lost, but scattered, coins that bound souls to darkness, coins that fueled the birth of new vampires. As the Gothic century advanced, Judas's curse no longer belonged to the pulpit. It belonged to fiction, poetry, and hidden orders. And yet, in this shift, his legacy grew. Judas was no longer a solitary traitor. He had become a type, the archetype of all who thirsted eternally, all who betrayed life itself. The Gothic vampire, admired in salons and feared in villages, carried his shadow. Thus, by the 19th century, Judas's transformation was complete. From biblical betrayer to mythic wanderer to the beating heart of Gothic horror, the stage was set, and soon a single novel would fix the vampire into legend forever. Chapter 7. Stoker's Shadow. In 1897, the world was introduced to a figure who would outlive his author and dominate modern imagination. Count Dracula. Bram Stoker's novel cemented the vampire as legend, but beneath the fiction, questions stir. Was Stoker's Count merely a creation of Gothic fancy, or was he built on something older, darker, rooted in scripture itself? Stoker's notes, preserved in fragments, reveal an obsession with folklore and theology. He gathered tales from Eastern Europe, scraps of myth, and apocryphal hints. But within his work, certain traits echo Judas's curse with chilling clarity. Dracula cannot bear holy symbols. Neither, according to medieval tales, could Judas, who recoiled from the cross, who could not stand in consecrated ground. Dracula cannot rest in common soil, but only in earth carried from his homeland. Judas, too, the early texts say, was rejected by the earth. His burial impossible, his body spat back again and again. Dracula is marked by blood, feeding on it, enslaved to it. Judas's betrayal, sealed with blood, cursed him with thirst eternal. Stoker even places his vampire's power in coins, bags of gold and wealth carried across centuries, wealth that corrupts and binds. Echoes of Judas's 30 pieces of silver ring here, faint but undeniable. Some scholars dismiss these parallels as coincidence. Others believe they reveal Stoker's intent, not to invent a monster, but to clothe one already whispered about for centuries, to give face and name to Judas's shadow, transfigured through fiction into a count who could be feared but never destroyed. The church never acknowledged the similarity, yet it lingered in culture. Readers instinctively tied Judas and Dracula together. Both traitors, both marked by blood, both cursed to wander without rest. The betrayer of Christ and the prince of the undead became reflections of one another, shadows cast across history and imagination. Thus, in the Victorian age, Judas's curse found its fullest disguise. No longer whispered in villages or buried in apocryphal texts, it strode across the stage of literature as Count Dracula. Fiction had become the vessel for truth, or at least the truth no priest dared admit. Chapter 8. Judas in the modern age. The 20th century prided itself on progress, industry, technology, science, war. Yet even in an era of machines and global empires, Judas's shadow endured. His curse no longer lived only in scripture or folklore, but in the secret rites of occult societies and the whispered fears of a world at war. Secret groups in Europe revived him. Theosophists and Rosicrucians hinted at Judas not as mere betrayer, but as the undying initiate, condemned to feed so that others might awaken. Some texts from these circles described him wandering through centuries under many names, never aging, always hungering. His thirst was framed as initiation, blood not as curse, but as a gateway to knowledge. During the First World War, soldiers in the trenches spoke of strange figures at night. Letters from the Eastern Front tell of pale men stalking no man's land, feeding on the fallen. One soldier described a man with black eyes and torn throat, laughing even as bullets struck him. For some, Judas was blamed, his curse reborn in battlefields where blood soaked the soil. The Second World War brought darker whispers. In occupied Eastern Europe, villagers swore Judas's presence stirred again. Entire regiments disappeared in forests, their corpses found drained, their blood blackened. Some claimed occult divisions within the Nazi regime studied Judas's legend, seeking immortality through blood. Records of these experiments were destroyed, but fragments remain. References to the wanderer of silver and the traitor's hunger conspiracies flourished after the wars. Was Judas's curse hidden in the Vatican's archives, locked away with forbidden gospels? Some researchers claim documents discovered in Nag Hammadi spoke of Judas as not destroyed but transfigured. Others pointed to suppressed texts of the Dead Sea, scrolls that hinted at a child of darkness who walks still. Whether real or imagined, the idea was clear. Judas was no longer just part of the past. He lingered in the present. As modernity marched forward, Judas's legend evolved yet again. He became the symbol of betrayal that never ends, the hunger that never dies, the shadow behind every tale of vampirism. And though the world claimed it no longer believed in monsters, Judas's curse remained hidden not in graveyards, but in the darkest corners of history and war. Chapter 9. Judas in modern imagination. If the 19th century gave Judas a disguise through Stoker's Dracula, then the 20th and 21st centuries gave him immortality through repetition. Every vampire on the page or screen, whether cloaked in castles or wandering city streets, carries fragments of Judas's ancient curse. Even if his name is never spoken, cinema became the new scripture in early silent films like Nosferatu, 1922. The vampire is shown as diseased, cursed, and unable to rest in the soil of strangers. The echoes of Judas are unmistakable. The body denied burial, the presence that spreads corruption. Audiences recoiled not just at the monster, but at the unspoken truth that this was a tale of sin reborn. Literature continued the thread. Writers in the Gothic and postmodern traditions often described vampires as betrayers condemned to hunger forever. Even Anne Rice's interview with the vampire spoke of immortals cursed with endless thirst and guilt, themes inseparable from Judas's legacy. Though her vampires bore no silver coins, their anguish mirrored his punishment: to wander, to consume, and to never escape the shadow of betrayal. In occult circles of the 20th century, Judas's name remained quietly invoked. Some fringe groups claimed that every artistic depiction of the vampire was not invention, but memory. That culture itself was unconsciously keeping Judas alive. They argued that cinema, novels, and even children's costumes were rituals of remembrance, feeding the shadow of the first betrayer so that his curse would not fade. Popular culture transformed Judas into countless faces: aristocrats, predators, lovers, and even tragic anti-heroes. Yet beneath all variations lies the same skeleton of myth: a figure cursed, a figure marked by blood, a figure who betrayed what was sacred and was denied rest. In this way, every vampire tale of the modern age, whether frightening, romanticized, or satirical, is a retelling of Judas's fate. The Bible may never admit it, the church may deny it, but in the theaters, in novels, in whispers of late-night audiences, Judas has never left. His curse endures, projected through screens, etched in paper, reborn in every new tale of the undead. Chapter 10. Shadows across the world. For centuries, Judas's curse was whispered in the heart of Christendom, but as scholars widened their scope, they discovered something troubling. Myths across the world bore uncanny resemblance to his fate. Could Judas's punishment have been less an isolated story and more a reflection of something older, something humanity has always known, yet feared to name? In the Middle East, tales spoke of wandering figures who could not die, forced to drink from the living to sustain themselves. The Aluka, a demon woman in Jewish folklore, was said to consume blood and roam the night. Some rabbis linked her to Lilith, others to nameless spirits, but a few whispered that such demons were born of Judas's betrayal, that his curse had spread like a contagion through bloodlines. In Slavic lands, long before Dracula, peasants buried suspected revenants with stones in their mouths or stakes through their hearts. They did so they claimed, because the earth refused them. The same phrase was once used of Judas in early apocryphal writings, that the ground would not accept him. Even in far Asia, echoes emerge. In Chinese lore, the Jiangshi, a stiff, corpse-like creature, drains life from the living and is cursed to wander. Though culturally distinct, its rejection of rest and hunger for vitality mirror the same curse assigned to Judas. Missionaries of the 17th and 18th centuries often noted these similarities but dismissed them as coincidence. Yet, some Jesuit letters reveal unease. How is it, one priest wrote from Hungary in 1712, that the peasants describe the betrayer as if they have seen him walk? His traits are the same as those given to the dead who rise. Could it be that Judas was not just a man, but a vessel of something older? That his betrayal unleashed not a new curse, but revealed one already waiting? A curse that crossed borders, that slipped into myths of every people, wearing new names but the same face. If so, then Judas was not only the first vampire of Christian imagination, he was the link binding faith, fear, and folklore into one. The betrayer of Christ had become the universal archetype of the undying, the restless, the blood-hungry. And as the world told stories of revenants, demons, and walking corpses, perhaps what they were truly remembering was not 1,000 myths, but a single man, a man who betrayed for silver and was transformed into the eternal shadow that no culture could forget. Chapter 11. Secrets of the Hidden Archives. For centuries, the Vatican has been called a keeper of truth, but to others, it is the guardian of silence. Deep within its archives, guarded by walls thicker than stone, lie documents the public has never seen. Records so old, so dangerous, that only a handful of scholars are ever allowed to glimpse them. Among these guarded shelves, some whisper, lies the true fate of Judas Iscariot. The Vatican's Archivum Secretum contains hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, including forbidden gospels, trial records, and letters from inquisitors. A small handful of catalog notes, rarely cited, often dismissed, hint at manuscripts now unaccounted for. One such note, from the 16th century, describes the Codex of the Betrayer, detailing a man who did not rest in earth, but wandered, drinking life from the veins of men. Another record mentions confiscated volumes from heretical sects that claimed Judas was the first of the bloodless dead. Both references vanish after initial mention, as if erased. Archaeology too adds fuel. In 1947, when the Dead Sea Scrolls were uncovered, scholars found fragments describing a son of perdition cursed to roam until the end of days. Most translations labeled this as allegory, but a handful of early researchers noted disturbing imagery: blood upon lips, eyes burning in night, a man who could not be buried. These fragments, curiously, were set aside and rarely published in popular editions. In modern times, rumors of discoveries continue. A sealed ossuary unearthed in the 1990s near a Jerusalem bore inscriptions scholars could not agree upon. Some claimed it read, "Judas, cursed of blood." Others dismissed it as forgeries, yet photographs circulated briefly before vanishing into private collections. Why the silence? Some argue the church fears that to admit Judas's curse as vampiric would unravel doctrine. Others believe the archives conceal such records because they prove the vampire was not folklore, but scripture hidden in plain sight. Whatever the reason, one truth lingers every time fragments appear, be they scrolls, gospels, or artifacts. They are quickly removed, sealed, or discredited, and perhaps that in itself is the greatest proof. If Judas was merely myth, why fear the telling? Why silence the shadow? Chapter 12. The Wanderer Still Walks. For 2,000 years, Judas has been cursed in the pages of Scripture. But if his story ended at a tree and a rope, why do the shadows say otherwise? Why do whispers of his presence continue? Not in the ancient desert, but in the streets of our own time. Throughout the 20th century, scattered reports hinted at something unexplainable. In the 1960s, a monastery in rural Spain recorded an incident of a tall man, pale with eyes burning red, seen walking the cloisters at night. The monks described his appearance with chilling detail. A black beard, gaunt face, and hands ending in claw-like nails. When asked who it might have been, the abbot wrote only one word in the margins of his diary: Iscariot. In Eastern Europe, villagers in Romania and Serbia continued to speak of the eternal traitor who appeared during famines and wars. Families claimed entire livestock herds were found bloodless, their bodies untouched by wolves. One story from 1987 describes a wanderer who came begging for food, accepted bread, but left behind a trail of dried blood upon the doorway where he stood. Even in the modern West, urban legends grow. A report filed in New York in 2003 described a man with foreign features who collapsed in a church. Witnesses swore the moment holy water touched his skin, smoke rose. He fled before anyone could intervene. The parish priest, later interviewed, said, "I believe I looked into the eyes of Judas himself. They were the eyes of a man who had never rested." If Judas was truly the first vampire, then his curse was not limited to one death or one people. His punishment was eternal wandering, eternal hunger, eternal rejection by earth itself. And if so, then he is still out there, alive, hidden, unnamed, but walking. Perhaps this is why his story remains buried in Apocrypha, erased from official doctrine, and locked away in Vatican vaults. For what could be more dangerous than admitting the betrayer of Christ was not only cursed but transformed? That the first vampire was not a figure of fiction, but a man whose shadow still haunts us. So the question remains, did the Bible hide that Judas was a vampire? Or has the truth been staring back at us all along? In the myths, in the graves, in the silence between midnight bells, the answer may not rest in Scripture, but in the unease you feel now. For if Judas's curse was real, then his story is not finished. It is still being written. In the hunger of the night, in the faces of the forgotten, in the steps of the wanderer who will never rest.